Hi, I'm Phyllis Lyons, and I moved to Boca Raton in 1975.
And I'm Sandy Altner, and I am a volunteer for the Boca Raton Historical Society on the Jewish Oral History Project. And we're so very pleased, Phyllis, that you were able to join us today to tell us your stories. And I would like to mention that today is December the 9th of 2015. It's hard to believe we're getting close to the end of the year already. And we are at the studios at Lynn University in the library. And we're very pleased that Lynn has been able to provide the studios to help us with this very important project.
Right.
So let's start with what brought you in 1975 to Boca.
Two things. First of all, my parents lived in South Florida, the Kendall area, so we had a young child and it would be nice to be with family. And I also had a lot of aunts and uncles here. The other thing, my husband was going to go into medical practice, and Florida was a good place for us to be. So those two things, and we started looking for where in South Florida we would live. We started in Coral Gables and went all the way up to Palm Beach and decided Boca was the right place for us.
What was it about Boca that stood out as a future home possibility for you?
Nice homes, not so expensive as in Palm Beach that we would never be able to afford to live there. And we met some people who were friendly, and it seemed like it was an up-and-coming community, a lot of people moving in. The Jewish community was very small, but there were the start of Jewish professionals in the area, and people were just very nice, welcoming.
So you felt that, were you specifically looking to find a place that was going to offer you a Jewish community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was very important to us, having a young child, and we would definitely want a Jewish community.
What did you find in that Jewish community when you first arrived here?
Not all that much. There were some synagogues that had formed, but none of them had a building. There were some Jewish organizations. In fact, some people said, oh, there are too many, but there really weren't very many. And it was the start of a young professional community moving here, young Jewish professional community moving here.
So would you say these were mostly young families who were moving, and young couples who were attracted to come to Florida?
Yeah, mostly young families, people with children my age. It was mostly medical at that point. The medical doctors came first. And each year that we were in Boca, for a number of years afterwards, I could almost say, well, they came in 77, they came in 78. It was really the start of the growth of the Jewish community here.
When you say a small community, Phyllis, what does that mean in terms of numbers? Can you quantify it in any way?
I don't know the numbers, but when I would go into a room, I would know almost everyone in the beginning. Of course, now it's so massive, I don't. But I knew a lot of people, and it was just starting, really.
You mentioned that your parents were here, and this seems to be the experience of very many people who started to come in the 70s and the 80s. When did your parents come to South Florida?
Oh, they came, let's see, probably in 1970 or 71. My father was in the wholesale produce business, tomatoes, and he was buying from New York, and he decided to move to Florida to buy directly the tomatoes from the growers. And so they were there about 71, yeah.
Okay, so his business was in New York, but he had contacts in Florida providing him.
Yeah, but it all changed. The industry changed where they used to be in one area in New York, then it moved to the Hunts Point Market in the Bronx, and it just seemed that it was diminishing in New York and people were buying directly, so he wanted that experience. And financially it was a very good move for them in terms of his business.
Let's talk a little bit about the business climate here. You've told me about how it was an attractive place for your husband to come because he's a doctor. What is your husband's name?
Stephen. Yeah.
And when he was, so when you look at what your parents' business climate was it welcoming to Jews when your father came?
Well, he was in South Florida. He was in Kendall, so it probably was. I don't in his industry there were many Jewish people, and so that was not a problem. It was a little different in Boca Raton when we first got here. I mean, the hospital was fine, but there was anti-Semitism. My husband had some patients who were anti-Semitic. He even had a patient who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I said, some of them, one of the anti-Semitic people said, I know you're Jewish, but I think Jewish people are the best doctors. You know, that kind of stereotype. But he was very anti-Semitic, this patient. The other one, the Ku Klux Klan member, my husband said, well, he needs medical services too. But that was the kind of thing that was not uncommon in this community. A friend of mine who came before me and was a realtor, and actually when she came, she was looking for, she wasn't a realtor at that point, she was looking for a home, and she said, are there any Jewish people here? Hoping the answer would be yes, and her realtor said, oh, you don't have to worry about that here, dear.
And
So
what year was that?
probably 5 or 6 years before we came.
So in the early 70s, there was that kind of sense in the community.
And there were even condominiums without any Jewish people. Royal Palm Country Club, there were no Jews in the community, the home community, and certainly none in the country club. And I know even after we were here, there was a time when people had to fight to get into that community. I don't know if anyone belongs to the country club there, but it wasn't even possible to buy a house initially there. Now it's all changed.
Let's step back a little bit and tell me a little bit about your background and Stephen's. When, because you moved here as a young couple without having had children yet, or did you?
No, we had our one-year-old son.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how your journey started to get you to Boca.
We both grew up in New York. I was initially from Brooklyn. My husband was from Forest Hills. We met when we were living on Long Island, and after he graduated medical school, Vanderbilt, we were in Long Island for 1 year for an internship. Then we went to Kansas City for his residency, and finally went to California for an allergy fellowship. But at that point, we really realized California was not a place to start a practice. It was inundated, and he was offered a job with Kaiser Permanente in Los Angeles, but we didn't want to live in Los Angeles. So it seemed like a good place to come to Florida because there was major growth. I had family here, and nice climate, so it seemed like a good place to start.
When you moved here, going back to the anti-Semitism question, first of all, when you were in New York, did you experience, or any of the other places you lived, did you experience anti-Semitism?
Not in New York, but in Kansas City we did. We bought an upright piano from a piano teacher who was involved in the junior league in Kansas City. And we invited them to our home for an evening, and we were having the nicest time until something came up about our religion. And after that, they suddenly had to leave. And even afterwards, when I sent them a card or something, never got a response. So we felt anti-Semitism. It was really the first we'd experienced anything as blatant as that.
In California, did you have?
No. Marin County has a large population of Jewish people, and we didn't have that. And the hospital he was at, there was no not in his department anyway. It wasn't that there were no Jewish doctors in his department, but it was not a problem.
Did you feel comfortable in 1975 when you first moved here with a 1-year-old baby and your husband starting his new practice?
Yes, I did. I had my parents not too far away. And there were young people moving in every year. So we became friends with some of the young people moving in. And I also started working when my son was 2 in Broward County in Deerfield Middle School as a reading specialist 20 hours a week. So I met more people. And there was just a growth of Jewish people in the community. Also, when I was in California, I became involved with the National Council of Jewish Women. And when I moved here, I would go, there was a group in Palm Beach, there was a group in Plantation. So for a year or two, I went to those groups when I could.
When you say people that you were meeting, are you talking specifically about the Jewish community, or were you meeting a variety of people from a variety of religions?
I was meeting a variety of people from a variety of religions. Absolutely. It was never, the medical community was very mixed, and people were nice. We didn't have any problem if they were Jewish or Christian. It was fine in Boca Raton. It wasn't so good in Boynton Beach. There was a lot of anti-Semitism at that point with Bethesda Hospital, basically because when the Jewish doctors started coming in, you kind of refer to people who come at the same time and came at the same time and who have similar backgrounds, and also it was cutting into the referral system of the people at Bethesda at that point. Of course, that's changed now, but that was a real issue, not at Boca Hospital, but at Bethesda at that point.
When you talk about the level of anti-Semitism that you were seeing in Boca Raton, though, was it just kind of a minor annoyance? Was it a huge problem? How would you describe it overall?
I would say it was minor.
Mm-hmm.
I would say minor. I never felt really that it was a real problem. But, as I said, when my husband had patients who were anti-Semitic and things like that, and I think some of the things that helped was when Rabbi Muriel Singer came, he started the interfaith, and with different, with the Catholic Church. There was a problem. I know my mother for 1 year after my father died, rented at Century Village. And she would come on the bus into Boca Raton. And that number 8 bus, the kids came from way west to go to the school across from the Temple Bethel. I can't remember the name of the, St. Joan of Arc. Mm-hmm. And when the people got on from Century Village, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. The kids would say really bad anti-Semitic things. But that all changed because we have interfaith things. And Rabbi Singer spoke to the Monsignor there, and it really changed. For years, when I taught at Temple Bethel Sunday School, we had a program where I had a sister I worked with every year with the 3rd grade, and it changed drastically. I don't know if it still continued on the bus, but because my mother moved, but I think it probably did change.
Let's talk about some of those changes, Phyllis. And I want to get to some of the work that you've done in so many different areas of our community here in Boca Raton. But let's start with what you see has evolved. Do we still see anti-Semitism today? Have there been major changes? Is there a greater tolerance?
I don't see any anti-Semitism. This is a lot of Jewish people in this community. A lot of people who probably were anti-Semitic moved because it was no longer a place where they wanted to be. And there's not an organization in this town that doesn't have Jewish people leading it, donating it, to it, whatever. So there's been a real change, in my opinion, as far as anti-Semitism, because I don't see any.
When we look at how quickly things have grown, we're talking about 1975 when you knew all of the people in the room. And there was a small collection of families. And today, it's over half the population of Boca Raton is Jewish. And I was surprised myself to learn that we are the most densely populated Jewish neighborhood outside of Israel.
I knew we were going to become that because I worked, I was an event planner and party decorator for a while. And in the 80s, early 80s, all of the large event planning companies from New York moved down here because the Federation statistics, the Federation said that this would become the largest young Jewish population in the country. And that's probably what has evolved.
When we look at the reasons why those Jewish families started coming, and you were here earlier than very many of them, what were they telling you of their reasons for coming to South Florida and to Boca in particular?
The weather, nice homes, affordable living. And at one point, you could buy a beautiful home here for $100,000, where up north it would be $300,000. So they were nice homes, affordable homes, a growing community, job opportunities. I mean, the doctors came first, and the lawyers, the accountants, the stockbrokers. It was a whole evolution of people, and some business people too. So it was a really big evolution.
When you look at the impact that the Jewish community has had, first of all, with education, because this was certainly your area. You were working as an educator from the very beginning, I would imagine, prior to even having children. Is that correct?
Right, yes.
Right. So with that, what kind of Jewish education was available in 1975?
I really didn't need the Jewish education then, but what they had was Bethel had a Sunday school, and the B'nai Torah, I believe, started about that time also with a Sunday school. I don't think there was too much other than that, not for young children. I mean, Boca Raton, when we first got here, on another vein, if you wanted to buy a challah, there was only one place in Boca Raton. You could buy a challah on Fridays in the Fifth Avenue shops at the deli. You could go into Deerfield and find challahs, but not in Boca Raton. So that's how the community has changed. I mean, every Publix has challah, every store, but there was only one place to have challah. Even once the Jewish population had started growing, one of the supermarkets was Winn-Dixie. They had matzah and all for Passover. The first day of Passover, they took it away. They thought the holiday was over after the first day. There was not the knowledge of Jewish customs that there is now. You would now, I mean, some of the Winn-Dixies have kosher departments. All changed tremendously.
What do you think are the greatest factors for that growth? You've mentioned some of them, that the weather is nice and so on, but the growth specifically of the Jewish community here, and particularly from New York. What happened to trigger that?
Just people would tell me different things. It's too crowded in New York. It takes too long to go everywhere. It's too expensive. There's not enough opportunities. They wanted warm weather. A whole lot of things. So, you know, and a lot of the people could have lived in New York quite successfully. One of my friends, whose husband was an orthopedic surgeon, his father was a Park Avenue orthopedic surgeon. He could have just taken over his practice, and he didn't want that. They wanted a life where they could play golf when they wanted to, not have to travel an hour to the suburbs or an hour and a half. They wanted a different kind of a little lower key lifestyle, but still with enough sophisticated things that was good. I mean, when I first moved here, I didn't get my hair done in Boca Raton. I would go down to Pompano Fashion Square, which sounds ridiculous now, but that was more fashionable than the hairstylists in Boca Raton.
How has the Jewish community changed the face of Boca?
I think in every way. So many of the organizations were founded and supported by Jewish people, not just Jewish organizations. You have the May Volan Center, you have Florence Fuller, so many Jewish organizations, so many non-Jewish, non-partisan organizations that the Jewish people have funded and been volunteers for.
Let's talk a little bit about tolerance and how that's changed over the years as well, as people were becoming accustomed to a changing community. What have you seen?
I just don't see any anti-Semitism. It might be there, but I don't see it. Sometimes I take an art class on Wednesday, and I'm amazed at how many people in there are Jewish. Not the whole class, but a good percentage. And those that aren't understand, a lot more about Judaism And some of them I'm friends with. You know, one woman who's Catholic and Puerto Rican, I'm friends with her. It's much more tolerant in general. She probably was tolerant all along. She was a former professor and all, but I just don't see anti-Semitism now.
What about in the other direction too? Do you see any activities where people would be offended to see a Christmas tree, for example?
I think some people are offended to see Christmas trees. I mean, I know Merle Singer worked hard to try not to have Rabbi Merle Singer to not have Christmas trees in places, but this is the culture. People like Christmas trees. They feel it's fair if they add a Hanukkah menorah, and they've gotten some big ones in places. It doesn't offend me, you know. It really doesn't. Nativity scenes are different, a little bit different. It's too religious for my feelings, but a Christmas tree doesn't bother me, and it's a celebration, you know.
So would you say that there's an increased tolerance from Jew to Christian, as Christian to Jew, that it's all
among liberal Jews? Yes. I don't know among people who are less liberal.
When we look at our community in Boca Raton, I mean the broader community, we have a tremendous mix of populations here. But within that is, as we were discussing, half of the population is Jewish, but with many different, as one of our interviewees has said, many different flavors of Judaism. What can you tell me about what the Jewish community is in the broader scale here today in 2015?
Oh, it's a total mix of all the segments. You know, they say you have 2 Jews, you have 3 temples, or 3 Jews, you have 2 temples, whatever. So you have everything from the Orthodox to the Chabad to conservative Jews to Reform Jews. You have a total mix. Reconstructionists, you have everything available here. So, and that's good, because everyone doesn't have to practice their religion in the same way. I think what Chabad has added, they try and have every Jew be the best Jew they can be. And so that I've seen at Bethel, we've had the Chabadniks come in and show how to make matzah and other things, and that's fine, you know. And so there's a real mix of ways of practicing Judaism here.
And part of that mix is to not practice Judaism, but to be Jewish.
There are plenty of people who are not affiliated in any way. They still consider themselves Jewish. If they need the services of a rabbi or a cantor, they get somebody to do whatever the services are. I think that's a little bit of a loss in the community, because there are so many Jewish people who are unaffiliated. And I think if you're affiliated, there's more chance of the traditions carrying on, especially through the children. It's not enough just to have a bar mitzvah to make children care about the religion, about Judaism.
Obviously, Judaism is very important to you and your family.
Right.
When you look at the long road down the future, do you fear that Judaism will become less popular, less important?
I think it is already to a lot of people. There's an awful lot of intermarriage, and that's not the problem so much. It's just what happens in the household if there is intermarriage. Are they practicing Judaism at all? Or is it just this minor thing, oh, we'll do both religions? So I think it's, for the future, there's probably going to be a loss of, to some extent. There's numerically not a loss, but how important it is to people can be the loss.
Let's talk a little bit about education and when it did become important to you to have a Jewish education for your children. What was available when you wanted that? You talked a little bit about the Sunday school. Was there an actual synagogue place to go to, or was this more informal?
By the time they were ready for Sunday school, there was. Bethel had been built, and my son started Bethel in Sunday school in the kindergarten. They didn't go to nursery school here at religious school. That was not what we wanted, but he was in kindergarten. My husband had an office manager who was Christian, and my son was very good friends with her son, and we went on a short vacation, I guess a week, and the office manager took our son. And we got back, and he had been in Christian Bible school that week and talking about the baby Jesus. Oh my. So that's when we became members of Bethel, and he started learning about more of the Jewish traditions. So, and he's conservative, keeps kosher because his wife does, and they have a very strong Jewish family affiliation.
A lot of people worry that their children will go off to college and then not come back to Florida. Is there a changing population in that way as well, do you think, in Boca, where all these children have come from being raised here, will grow up and go off to college, as most do, it seems, go out of state to go to college? Then what happens?
Some of them stay in state, and some of them, the ones who stay in state almost all come back to Florida. Those who even go out of state, it's a mix. My children don't like Florida, so neither of them settled here, but my daughter is back for the winter with her scarves and her art. So even she's back, but my son, no, Florida's not for him.
So an artist will have a base here, as your daughter does, without difficulty, but it's a personal choice.
It's a personal choice, exactly. Mm-hmm. And she lives in France most of the year, so that's another story. But she's back here now, and as I said, our son doesn't really love Florida, and so he's not here, but there are plenty of my friends' kids who are back in Florida.
When they come back in this generation, I'm talking about the people who are sometime between 20 and 30, who perhaps have now completed their education and launched their careers and so on. What careers are they entering when they come back to Florida?
Just let me see. Some of them are in marketing. Some of them are in medicine, not that many. Some of them are stockbrokers, law. Not too many in medicine, that I'll tell you, but they're in all the different professions. Some are in businesses too, so it's a wide range of different things. But the ones I'm thinking of now, a lot of them are working for corporations, big corporations, which would never have happened 40 years ago, where the Jewish population was not involved in the corporate world in that way, but now they are.
When we look at the way Boca has changed, it's never been much in the way of a manufacturing center.
Right.
It's been a much different kind of a business climate here, and you've mentioned some of the professions that are here, but in terms of corporate realities, corporate business, what would you describe as the biggest area of appeal here for businesses to come here? What kind of businesses come here?
Well, I know Office Depot has its national headquarters. IBM left, but they were a big factor when we first came. I guess they like the weather, and they feel there are people who can work for them here. And one of the things that had been a problem was the schools, because some companies didn't feel the schools were strong enough for their families. But I don't hear that as much anymore. I think the public schools have improved, and I also think there are so many private schools to choose from as well.
How has the Jewish community changed education in Boca Raton? Or had an impact on it, even on the public school side?
Well, there's a lot of money donated, and there are some very good teachers who are Jewish who come here and, happy to teach. And there's a lot of things like at Sugar Sand Park, there's science, and I know some of my cousin who's a major science teacher for a while had been a major and retired, worked there. There's a lot of people coming in who have a lot of valuable resources to add. The Boca Museum, a lot of the docents are Jewish. A lot of the money donated and the art collections are from Jewish people. So that adds to the wealth and the strength and the the phenomenon of this community. I often feel there's nothing that can't be done here. I mean, look at the libraries now. They built that lovely one on Spanish River, and then the downtown one is phenomenal. And they're all used, and that's what's fabulous about it. So there's a lot of different cultural things. People are also involved in the schools. They want better schools. They're on the school, in the school, the PTAs and everything else, trying to get better schools. And the kids do well in the public schools. Some of them, the courses are good. They can go to top colleges, so that adds to it. And then you have some fabulous private schools. So the whole educational environment has changed because of sophisticated families, parents who care about education, and kids who do too.
People who are not Jewish might not recognize how important education is to Jewish families. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why is it so important to Jews that education is a very high value?
It's always been like that. I think partly it was because they could take away people's possessions, but you could never take away an education. People who had knowledge would always have that. Even if there's a pogrom and you lose whatever you have, you still have whatever knowledge you have. So that's it. And that was the way that Jewish people could get out of the ghettos. I mean, if they got educated, they could go into a lot of different things other than having a push cart. So, which my grandmother and grandfather had a push cart, then had a trucking company, and then you could evolve from that. So education was the key to higher socioeconomic levels, to having just a wonderful life for yourself.
The Anti-Defamation League has been a large part of your life. How did you become involved?
I've been working in Jewish corporate life for most of my career. Jewish life was Jewish day schools, such, and then I went to work for Israel Bonds, State of Israel Bonds, and then I was so pleased when I got the job with Anti-Defamation League.
What was your job?
I was Associate Director of Development, fundraising, planning events. I worked with several communities. My primary ones were Boca West and Del Air. And ADL is a phenomenal organization. Of course, it was founded to stop anti-Semitism after a horrible incident in Atlanta 100 years ago. But it's grown so much since then. It fights terrorism on so many levels. There are records kept. Federal authorities cannot keep records of people unless they're indicted or convicted of a crime. ADL can keep the records forever. So they have Ku Klux Klan, they have others. And when there's been certain terrorist things, the federal government has come to ADL. ADL also has several people monitoring, this is nationally, terrorist internet sites, and monitors them. They have Arabic speaking people to see what's going on. But even locally, the largest right-wing extremist group in the country is in West Palm Beach. They have a whole blog and everything else. ADL monitors them. ADL became aware that one of their, the son of the owner, of the founder of this organization, wanted to run for legislative office. Making people aware of who this person was makes a difference in who become our spokesmen and legislators. We don't want people who hate in those kinds of jobs. So that's what ADL does. Not only fighting anti-Semitism, but right-wing extremism, terrorism, and a whole lot of really vital issues in our times.
Has the role of the ADL changed, do you think, in relation to how communities have evolved and the issue of tolerance and respecting other cultures and so on. Is that an aspect that has been more emphasized in a greater way in recent years?
There's always the whole aspect of ADL is that you have to be positive that you can educate people and they will change. Sometimes they've been educated so badly the wrong way you can't, but ADL has programs from preschool on in not Jewish schools, in all schools, to teach about tolerance and to develop tolerance and educate people about what's really right, because education is the key to changing things as far as ADL is concerned.
And a message of respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Respect for all religions. I mean, when in ADL, it's not only Jewish people working. There's a lot of Christian people. There's a lot of different nationalities internationally, because that's what ADL is, non-discriminatory for all people.
What has been the most rewarding aspect for you personally in working with the ADL?
The donors. I like the people. I mean, getting people to understand how important the organization is, getting people to donate their time and their money. That's what's really important. Building knowledge about what's going on. And some of the people I've met through ADL, I mean, we had a speakers program. We had Elie Wiesel. We had lots of really important speakers, and that was very meaningful and rewarding for me.
Things were chugging along in Boca Raton as they were everywhere in our country until 2001, when everything changed on 9/11. What impact did 9/11 have on this community?
Well, obviously not as much as up north, I mean, people still feel secure here. They feel safe. So, I mean, it was the worst part was that people had family and friends who were killed in 2001 with the World Trade Center horror. But, I mean, the other thing is when you realize that some of the terrorists were right in this community, and then there was the other people who were killed by whatever the powder was. I mean, there was certainly reason for concern and alarm, but we feel that that it's still a relatively safe community. What is safe anymore? You never know anymore. But that was the bad impact, was that people were here being trained and everything else, and then going and doing awful things. And no one knew or no one said anything, and that was what was worrisome.
Is there something that changed in the community in terms of a view toward tolerance, a view toward education, a view toward vigilance, perhaps, and opening our eyes to see what was going on around us? Can you address that, or were there any changes of that nature in the Jewish community in terms of the fear of having people who were here to harm?
I don't know. I know there were a lot more outreach to some of the mosques. And I know with ADL there were some of the mosques that they felt the imams were very open and they wanted to work with them, and some of them they didn't want to work with because they didn't feel it was good. There were also certain Islamic organizations that ADL did not want to work with because they felt they was truly anti-Semitic. So it all
it's a
depended.
complicated problem that continues.
Yes, absolutely. It's complicated, and I know ADL has a program, Jewish and Muslim women meeting together. Some of the other synagogues, I believe, have meetings with some of the people from some of the mosques, which is good too.
So the interfaith efforts have continued and broadened.
Yes, I think they absolutely have. Absolutely.
When you look at some of the other work that you've been doing in the community too, outside of ADL, you've been involved in Temple Beth El from the very beginning.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about starting a synagogue. And being one of the early members, basically, when it was just...
Oh, it was already started when we got here. I know some of the initial founders, and I know when they built the first building and they had 7 classrooms, the president of the synagogue at the time said, "How are we ever going to fill 7 classrooms?" Well, the community changed and they filled many, many more classrooms. The number of synagogues and religious organizations has increased tremendously. And someone said to me, like with ADL, well, we have ADAL, we have AJC, we have Wiesenthal. Why can't you all be one organization? Well, you know what? That wouldn't work so well for a variety of reasons. First of all, they're all doing slightly different things. And if you're a member of all of them, you're counted 3 times. So you have 3 times the strength and 3 times the influence and 3 times the power that if everything was just one organization.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And when we look at the outgrowth of that and philanthropy in this community, how has the philanthropy impacted what we now have in Boca?
Tremendously. As I said, I don't think there's a single organization here that hasn't been positively impacted by funds from the Jewish community. Certainly the hospital, FAU. I don't know much about Lynn, but probably Lynn too, I don't know. Every organization has had major Jewish influence in terms of donations, which has led to so many more wonderful things. I mean, the museum, Boca Museum, a lot of the collections and a lot of the donations are from Jewish donors. I recognize the names when I see the names. I know this one, I know that one. So it certainly has had a positive influence on all of the organizations of this city.
And in the area of meeting special needs for special people who have not the advantages and perhaps physical advantages of I suppose many people call the mainstream population and so on. How has Boca responded to meeting special needs for special people?
I don't know if I'm as aware of that. I know that for the autistic community, it's not as good as it should be. I know people who have autistic children who feel they have to take their children out of this community to have their needs met.
And that's starting to change now with the Sloman Center.
Probably,
and the outreach that's
probably,
starting to build.
but
so we're just at the beginning of really seeing that addressed.
Of meeting those needs. I'm not as sure about other special needs, but I know there were certain, but I know the autism was one of the real weaknesses in this community. But there are lots of schools for learning disabled children, and that's a very big field, the learning disabled. And that's important, and then there's also JARC and other Jewish...
The Jewish Association for Residential Care?
Yes, which which offers many, many opportunities for people with disabilities, and it's not only Jewish people who use those facilities, so there are a lot of influence in that way too.
One of the things that's interesting about Boca is the population demographics, if you will. We have a great many more people who are in their elder years here than the national average. I believe it's considerably more than the national average here. What is it like to be growing older in Boca?
Oh, it's good. Because no matter how old you are, there's always people older. And it's good that also when you go into certain restaurants, there's a young population, which is nice. So it's nice. I mean, I don't mind growing older here because I never feel that old. And there's enough of every age group. And then it's good that there are some older people that you can learn from and offer assistance to. I mean, one of my best friends is going to be 80 this year. And she's a very sophisticated lady and knows so much. So it's good having older people as well as having a younger population. Plus I have friends who are 20 years younger than I am. So it's all variable. I like the diversity.
And at Temple Bethel, I know that there was, I had reason to be asking about the different populations and so on because we were looking at opportunities to really celebrate the elder population in the synagogue, and certainly we do that. But one of the things is, I thought, well, maybe we could do something special for anyone who's over 90. And they said, well, there are 80 people who are over 90, and there are 5 people who are over, no, I think it was way more than 80 at that point, but we have currently, in 2015, 5 people who are over the age of 100.
Wow.
So when you think about, I suppose it can be said it's good living in Florida for the elderly.
Good living for people who take care of themselves. You know, I mean, a lot of those people probably exercise. One of my friends from my Pilates class, she's in her late 80s. She's going skiing this week. And I said, well, who do you go with? Do you go with a group? She says, yeah, a group of her age. She used different terms. But that's good. They're going to Vail, and that she can ski at 86 or something. Incredible. But she's also doing Pilates at 86. So I think there's a certain level. Some people get away with it doing nothing. But a lot of people who survive relatively healthy are doing things to help their bodies.
And what about amenities for the elderly here?
Well, I think there are a lot of them. There's the May Volan Center. There's things through the Jewish Federation. There's the bus program where you can just from May Volan as well as from Jewish Federation, Jewish Community Center, where people get picked up and taken to doctor's appointments and other places. I think the buses are increasing. That would be nice too. So,
just want to ask you one more question then. If we look at where you were in 1975 with a young family and a brand new job for your husband, setting up his practice here and so on, his medical practice, and to come all the way through to now, to 2015 from 1975, what do you see as, has Boca met your desires, your dreams?
absolutely. Absolutely. I love that I can be outside all year long. I even garden in the summer because I'm a big gardener. When I'm up north, my children live in Maryland, Bethesda, Maryland, my son and daughter-in-law. Ooh, it's getting so cold, and, but here it's, except for the rain, which is okay too, because I don't want a drought. You're outside all the time. You can always do things outside. The sun is shining. It's a wonderful place to be.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Phyllis.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.